Welcome back. Today we do a quick one on the Kiwi Ears Septet. So here it is up close, and on the bottom, kind of have an all black bottom to it. Nothing too significant going on there. It's kind of I assume that's actually aluminum. It's definitely some kind of lightweight alloy-ish. On the back is sort of what is special about Septet, which they don't actually put on the front of the box, but that grill that you see is sort of an open back. It's about as open back as IEMs get, so you can hear some noise leakage through the back. It's probably passing through, venting out a little bit of bass as well. But the box essentially tells you what is special about Septet. It is a 1DD, 4BA, 1 planar, and 1 piezo IEM. So lots of drivers. This is, I would call it the follow-on to Quintet. It's kind of along the lines of that. You also do get a modular cable, which is almost color matching to that grill. I think the black and the copper is actually a really nice combination. And as I said, it is modular, and you get the 3.5 and the 4.4. You do get the standard Kiwi Ears case as well. So we'll kind of jump into it, and I will kind of point out the graph on this one is very deceiving. It doesn't really graph as well as some other sets, and I think it's mainly because of this planar artifact. So depending on which tips you use to measure it, this bump is either kind of right there at the Harman target, or it is much higher. And that's just a tip choice. But I do think that there is a planar artifact there. And I think if you just glance at the graph, it looks wicked bright, but it's actually not that. I think it's just the planar doing its planar thing, and not being a fan of our couplers, as most planars are not fans of our couplers, and you end up with artifacts that look similar to that, just over a wider range. So I think that's just a shortened version of what we would see on a typical full-size planar set. On the sub bass, they did add a little bit over Astral. They did add in more mid bass, which was the right thing to do. It's the right thing to do on nearly every set. So nice to see that they did it on Septet. So what is it? As I said, this one is a 1DD, 4BA, 1 planar, 1 piezo. It is about $279 on Linsol Audio. And sort of one of the most important things to know about Septet is this one is a perfect storm of volume. One, it is very hard to drive. Those of you with phones, I would highly suggest you get a dongle that has quite a bit of power. And even if you get it up to your listening volume, it takes even more volume to get it up to the point where it opens up. So it's the perfect storm. You've got to get a lot of volume to get it to the point where it's at the same listening volume. And even if you get it there, it's still going to take more volume to open up and sound like an actual quad brid. But if you do that, and you can do that with your dongle or your amp, yeah, it's a very, very fun, highly resolving. It's much more fun, more resolving than I would say Astral ever was. And I had a big problem with Astral. I think volume was a big problem on that set. It's a little bit more expensive than Septet. It has 6 balanced armatures. To get it to the point where it sounded like it had 6 balanced armatures required more volume, sort of in the same way. But if you did it, it just became really forward, in your face, and it didn't really sound good at higher volume. It sounded much better at lower volume. And I never really got it to the point where it was comfortable sounding like it had 6 balanced armatures, but still sounding somewhat natural and enjoyable to listen to. I never quite got there with Astral. With Septet, once you figure out how much volume this thing really takes, it is a very fun, enjoyable. It's probably one of the more fun hybrids that I've heard in a while, especially at this price point. Certainly more fun than Quintet. But again, pay really close attention to this. This is like no joke. It's hard to drive, and it takes a lot of volume to open up. So, as I said, Astral or Septet, easily Septet for me. Astral was either natural or resolving, but not really both at the same time. Septet fixes that by going kind of more of a fun tuning. Maybe not perfect timbre, because it still has 4 BAs right in the middle, but it has a great, fun, V-shape, energetic sound. And the stage is really, really much better than Astral ever is. And that was sort of one of the other things that I never really pursued with Astral was you can EQ Astral to make it sound maybe closer to Septet, but to get the stage even remotely close to where Septet is, that's going to be like a lot of work. That's even more work, and it just wasn't worth it for me anyway. So Septet or Quintet, and I think Quintet was one of those sets that maybe tried to be a little bit too serious for me. I think they lowered the bass, they kind of pushed this a little bit forward. I think they tried to sound like a more expensive hybrid at a at kind of a more affordable price with more drivers. I think that idea was right, but at some point it just sounded a little bit too harsh for me. Again, it was another set that didn't really scale with volume as much as it should, and it was just really hard to listen to at higher volumes. And so for me, it kind of easily Septet fixes those little bits. And again, this one sounds a lot more fun to me. It's not trying to be serious. They put more fun here, more body there. It's more fun. And then this kind of energetic out there, I think it just is more appealing to me than Quintet ever was. So what does this one sound like? It sounds like pop music. You get kind of this heavy bass hit to it. The vocals from the 4 BAs are kind of sharp and a little bit forward. And then this kind of carries out planar electronic, the upper part of pop music just is right there and really nice extended, has really nice energy to it. In general, I would say it's probably closer to dance music than pop music, but the idea is there. It's just kind of end-to-end fun. It kind of brings together a lot of the bits that are engaging to people and fun to listen to, and it just didn't try to be too serious, and I think that was just a really wise move for this driver choice. So is there an open back effect? Like I said, this little mesh back there is kind of an open back, and you can hear the music through it. And I do think that there is some bass control to it, probably maybe venting some sub bass to it. There's no real boom to it. So they're probably doing something, or, part is the driver, part is they're probably venting a little bit of the sub bass so it doesn't boom or bloat in that way. And on the bass, again, this is the part that I actually liked about Astral, and it's quite similar here. I think Kiwi picked a faster driver. It could handle those higher levels without the boom, and I think, again, this open back is probably doing something with respect to that as well, because even as you turn it up and up, the sub bass never really sounds like it's going to boom or bloat. It just kind of vents out, and some people will listen to that and say, well, it needs more sub bass and it's rolled off and it sounds like an open back headphone. Yeah, it kind of takes on that rolled off bit where you'll keep on turning up the volume and it never really has that density of sub bass that you would get on a closed IEM or even a closed headphone. So venting it out a little bit, that is perfect for me. It may not be perfect for you. Think about how much of the boom that you like in the sub bass. But I do think that, maybe the open back helps there. I think committing to more fun level in the sub bass and then adding the mid bass. So they added a little bit to the sub bass. They definitely added more into the mid bass. And these two things just kind of work together with this driver combination to make it sound just a little bit more fun, a little bit more natural. It helps the other drivers sound more natural if you just give it a little bit of bottom end, mid bass, some body to it, so it doesn't sound so balanced armature, it doesn't sound so planar. This was just a smart choice to put a little bit more mid bass there. And on the mids, I'll say, kind of at the first glance, I think BA mids with mid bass, so there's more body than your typical U-shaped hybrid. Sort of where I didn't like Astral all that much. It essentially sounded like, because they dropped the mid bass down here, they popped the sub bass there, it sounded like a lot of other U-shaped hybrids. And so just adding a little bit more sub bass, adding a little bit more body to it, kind of kicking this up in this way just gives you a little bit more natural lower mid, certainly a little bit more fun on the sub bass. But when you really listen to it, there are moments where it sounds more resolving or more expensive BAs, and it's probably that planar mixed in. Again, I think this is the part that Quintet didn't quite get right. When you listen to the mids and you hear the lower mids, and you're like, yeah, that's pretty nice. They put a little bit more body into it. It sounds a little bit more natural. And then you start to hear the planar text kind of kick in and some of the decays and the reverbs that don't exist at lower price sets except on planars. Yeah, Septet kind of caught my attention. I'm like, oh, I didn't expect to hear that. And I'm hearing something that I really wasn't hearing on Astral at all. And yeah, it's probably because they are mixing the planar and the piezo together, and these two are sort of mixing with the balanced armatures. I think they pulled off this combination of drivers much better than they did on Quintet. And yeah, and I think the fun tuning again helps there, but really there are moments where you hear something you just haven't heard on lower price sets unless they are planar. And it really kind of caught my attention. And then that's when I really started to turn up the volume. And again, I'll say it again. It's not a low volume set. It takes quite a bit of volume to sound fully resolved. But when it opens up, very, very cool set. And I just kind of kept on turning it to the right. So, yeah, I think people who just say it sounds natural and maybe it's not even as resolving as Astral, you guys are at a volume level that is way, way too low. You got to turn this one up way up there, much more than Astral, much more than most Kiwi ear sets, just to get it up to your normal volume and then to keep going. So you hear this combination of the BA text combined with a planar, and these two kind of together is probably one of the few companies that pulled off these two in combination that actually does add to, what even more than what a typical normal BA set would sound like. I think the combination was actually right. And even going back to Supermix 4, right? That was the right idea, but they did a very U-shaped Harman style tuning, and there was no real body to it. They kind of poked this up a little bit too far. It was really hard to hear the planar advantage in that set just because the tuning wasn't really leaning into what the drivers can do well. And I think Kiwi Ears Septet does a much better version of this driver combination on a tuning where you can actually hear the advantages of all these drivers in combination. It's done really quite well. And on the treble, as I said, the graph looks really crazy. Mine is a lower version because I use the smaller bore tips. If you use the wide bore tips, you're going to get like a crazy bump out there that makes it look crazy bright. It is not crazy bright. It's not neutral either, but these are fun V-shaped levels. And definitely coming from Astral, this is a better extended treble because you can actually turn it up and hear everything without the upper mids getting in the way. So a track like Darude Sandstorm, even with higher volume, Darude Sandstorm kind of sounds right at higher volume, the way it opens up and it doesn't get in your face. And again, that was just a little bit that I pointed out on Astral. And you can actually see that the point that I pointed out on Astral is pretty much the same on Septet. And that's kind of why I said that this whole thing is a bit of an artifact. And it probably isn't like that. It probably cuts down even lower than what Astral does. But when you turn up a track like an electronic track that goes kind of end to end on the frequency range, and you hear it really open up and sound like you're in a room as opposed to a really strong central point on electronic music, just doesn't work for me. And this set actually does it quite well. Again, I kind of leaned into electronic music on Septet. I think it's a really, really nice pairing to it. Pop music, electronic music. I wouldn't necessarily and when I say that Quintet was a little bit too serious, I think that one was where they really tried to do the really, really nice vocals and really nice vocalists like Adele, Hello, pulling off that track. It was kind of okay on Quintet. But, I think there is something to just making a fun V-shaped set, and that's kind of where I would put Septet. And on the stage, again, I think Kiwi hit all the key points on this one. They hit the mid bass. You need a little bit of that for depth. You need lower ear gain so it doesn't pop in front of your face. You do need the upper treble extension so it all sounds bigger. And it's also why I went heavy EDM on Septet, as I was talking about. I don't like EDM on a heavy, cramped space because everything sounds overlapping. It gets too intense. And Darude Sandstorm is just one of those tracks where if it's on a smaller stage where it's just inside your head, that's a really intense track at kind of medium to higher volume, and you really need something that's going to sound bigger and projected and give you the space that you need to really enjoy that track and sound like the track is supposed to be played. So that is what I got on Septet. So thank you guys again for tuning in, and I will see you next time.